What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 ways to remove a head. Tonight I'm your host, Phil, and joining me are my two supporters in execution, Skyler and Josh. How you doing, guys?
Doing well. Still got my head attached.
Mine too.
Yeah, great.
Oh my god, we have so much in common.
Haven't crossed Nagash too recently. All right, well, for folks who haven't guessed already, tonight we are going to be talking some Headsmen, and specifically we're going to do a live deck build. Haven't done one of these in a while, so for folks who are not familiar, this is where we basically build a deck live here on the channel, and we're going to just do it from the top, build it out, and come up with a deck that we will then be playing in the near future. But we have a few topics to hit before we get there. Also, some context to make sure you know when we're recording. It is currently June 25th, and the Void Cursed and starter sets came out, I guess it's about a week ago now. Guys, do you have any community shoutouts? Anything related to those new products? Anything going on in the community that you want to let people know about?
I would just like to give a shout out to our local community. I still love you guys. I just started a new job recently, and it's taking a lot of my time and headspace. I promise I'm not leaving you. I'll be back soon.
Good to hear. Skyler, I think you just did something pretty cool, right?
Yeah. I'll shout out the Vassal Brawl tournament circuit. What they've done is they've essentially turned like a 2-day tournament into a event that occurs over time, where they try to get as many people in on 4 different days. 16 people top. Each one of these qualifier days is what they call them. And so for each of the 4 qualifiers of a Vassal Brawl, there's going to be 3 rounds of best of 3 championship play. And at the end of the 3 rounds, there's going to be 2 players whose records kind of are above the rest, but not necessarily having competed against each other directly. They don't need a decisive winner, because what they do is the top 2 players receive an invite to the invitational. And so you kind of end up with this really cool tournament feel that feels inclusive, because they aim for 4 different days for the qualifiers, different time zones, to try to get people around the globe to join up. And then once, all 4 of the qualifiers are done, the invitational happens. And from memory, I believe those matches end up getting scheduled on a weekly basis instead of on a single day, to make sure that it continues to be something that can fit within people's schedules. So really, really cool event, cool way to, take what would traditionally be like a 2-day tournament and make sure you can get as much participation as possible. And I played in one of those this morning. It's the 3rd ever Vassal Brawl, and it was the 3rd qualifier for the Vassal Brawl. And I was fortunate enough to take 2nd this morning.
Attaboy. Holding it down.
With Miari's Pingifiers, Redux. So.
Yeah. Running it back. A cool deck and a job well done getting into that.
Thanks. I'm excited for the invitational.
Yeah. It should be fun. It is, like you said, it's a really cool tournament format. It is some of the best players in the world, probably. So definitely high level competition. For anybody who's wanting to test themselves, it's definitely a good way to do so.
I'm nervous. I feel like I'm going to get shredded apart. Invitational day.
Well, hey, you made it this far, so yeah, I feel like you've got as good a chance as anybody else.
Appreciate that.
All right. So that's some community shout outs. We kind of know what's going on with Skyler. Josh, anything the hex going on with you?
Just trying to, if you'll pardon the pun, keep my head on straight.
Yeah. No, we definitely peddle in puns here. Unless Davey's here. Yeah, I feel that as well. I have also not really been as able to be part of our local groups and league as I would like. Um, but I have, in the time that I haven't been able to play, I've been undergoing a fairly substantial hobby room reorganization and cleanup, which has felt good, although a little bit crazy because it's like take out everything and reorganize, and the room is a disaster at the moment trying to get everything organized, but should be good when it's all done.
That is infamously my favorite way to clean. And there are many people in my life that have lived with me, family obviously included, that consider that like a hallmark of mine. And they always make fun of it that I like
Well,
pull everything out and decide what goes back in where.
yeah, well, it's one of those things where I hadn't been keeping things well organized, so it's like everything's kind of been haphazardly placed to the point where it got like unmanageable. So it was like, all right, now everything needs to go back where it's supposed to be, which means I need to take all the things that are where they're not supposed to be down so I
Yep.
can actually put things in the right place. And it's, yeah, definitely chaotic.
It's very
I
relatable.
too am a must get worse before it gets better kind of cleaner.
Yep. There's only one way through this. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, let's get on to the main topic, as these tend to be fairly intensive. Any final comments before we move on?
Let's roll.
Let's get after it.
All right. So, as I mentioned, we are today building a deck for the Headsman's Curse, relatively new warband, and one that I think is, at least in flavor, a huge win. We will be building for Championship today. We are working our way towards a upcoming Madtown Throwdown, one of our local tournaments, where we will be using the Championship format. So it felt apt to build in that same format. Guys, how are you feeling about Headsman's Curse? Where do you think that they stand? Do you think their play style fits best? General feelings. Let's throw them out.
Generally speaking, my overall vibe with the Headsman's Curse is that they are going to be potentially a rather frustrating warband if you just have a really bad dice day, but that can be any aggro band. But maybe more so them, because they want to tee up a really important swing. And then, again, we're just rolling with the puns here, execute on that swing. So I think that's going to be the name of the game, and trying to find objectives that fall in line with that kind of mission.
Sure. Skyler, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I want to echo that. What little I've seen so far of the Headsman's Curse, I've seen like an element of swinginess because they have to get, they can do it in one, right? One kill if it's perfect to get inspired. But they're not inspiring you generally unless they, have successfully gotten 2 kills minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can be really difficult to get the heads rolling. I mean, the ball rolling. And I also can't figure out how I would play them. So I want to play them, like, I want to propose that, like, they would be best played counterpunch. But I think it's difficult to incentivize the enemy to come to you unless that's already their game plan. So, you have to be prepared. Like, if you're going to play counterpunch and you're going to try to play a game of have them come to you, which I think is where they're going to excel, then you also have to be prepared to flip the script and run into enemy territory and take down somebody playing passively, or, whether that be a hold build or something unique to them.
Yeah. I certainly feel that thought of, like, I don't quite know what I want to do with these guys. On their face, they feel very aggressive, and I think you could build them as pure aggro, and you just sort of charge in and do, big swings with the executioner. But I do agree, it feels risky. Like, what if your dice don't work out? Then you've put a lot of eggs in one basket, and maybe that won't work out. I was trying to see as I was prepping for this, like, how could a flex build work with these guys? Is there some way that you can force someone to come to you if you're, holding some objectives? But ultimately, a lot of their stuff in faction doesn't really support that. So my sort of eventual landing place is probably pretty aggro with maybe some passive scoring built in that, you can score on your way into enemy territory, which is something we've seen a lot of, aggro warbands with their insurance plans.
Yeah.
That kind of feels where they're at for me anyway.
Same. I'm definitely leaning flex with them. I think if you try to just rush into enemy territory out the gate, you're going to run into a couple problems. If you run in with the wielder too early, well, then he's going to start soaking up damage, and you risk losing him far too early for your game plan.
Sure.
Or, like round one, you've got 4 fighters, so you're not likely getting a charged out action. Unless you can count on, what fighter is going to drop. Right. But if that the fighter that is killed has already been charged, well, then, you're not getting. So generally round one, I don't think you're really seeing charged out. So you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. So you might only have, one charge out of the wielder versus, having the pushes that you need to get him where you want him. And they do have access to a lot of pushes. So I think you got to lean on that for sure as the overall game plan. But speaking to the 2 problems that I think you have invading, one, the wielder, already said. The other is if you're running with the scripter or the sharpener, they're just really vulnerable, and they can't do too much. They can't put down too much damage as they stand. Right, the sharpener is dealing 1 damage on 2 swords if he's lucky. He's got 2 health to his name, so anything slips through and he's going down. And then the scripter on 3 and 1 dodge, that's as bad as, but generally worse than an elf profile, right? Until he can get inspired.
Yeah.
So I just feel like, those 2 come in early. There's a good chance you're losing them. You can always lean into resurrection. But on the flip, if you're running in with the wielder before, you should, then your game plan's in danger.
Absolutely. So we kind of know some of their weaknesses, some of the things we're building around for their game plan. Without getting too in the weeds here, at a high level, where do we see the competition in Championship? I don't want to be like all these warbands and like go through a full list, but like generally, what are we planning around?
So I think with the emergence of, oh man, the name of the card is going to escape me instantly. There's a new hold 2 for 3 glory. Is it Claim the Prize?
It is.
That it is.
Yeah. So with Claim the Prize entering the scene, I think we're seeing a resurgence of hold strat right now. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's extremely meta relevant, especially with Sepulchral Guard coming out and excelling at it.
Yep.
And then Pandemonium and Domiton Storm Coven are on everybody's minds with how recent their releases are, how fun they are, and how competitive those decks are.
Yeah. So you'd say, I guess, there's a lot of hold, there's some magic and some flex play. Are we expecting to see a lot of counter aggro where like we'd be aggro on aggro?
I think Ripa's is always a step away from the conversation of aggro. They have a really strong aggro kit, and they really live or die by the dice, but good God, when those dice hit, they hit like a truck.
Sure.
So I think we'd be doing them a disservice by not at least bringing them up. I don't know if Gnarl Spirit Pack are still ugly in the scene with aggro, but their taste definitely still hasn't left my mouth from when they emerged.
Sure. I mean, they've still got good profiles, right? The restricted cards definitely hurt them, but I would agree. I think there's something there. Something I haven't heard mentioned yet, but I feel like there's a lot of ping right now.
Yes. Yes.
So even if you're not like necessarily aggro in the sense of charges, you can put out a lot of damage from your power deck. So I feel like that's something to be aware of right now. So I think, not to get too bogged down in this discussion, but I think we can say there's a lot of sort of flexible damage. There's hold objective strategies, either leaning very heavily towards hold or flexing into some hold, and a pretty broad spectrum of strategies, but they all have some shared tenets of like, we're using power deck to deal damage, we're able to hold objectives for some high scoring cards, and generally the name of the game is no longer charge into enemy territory, at least not initially.
I concur. Yeah.
With that backdrop, let's get into this. So I think it's always good to start with building our deck from the objectives, and knowing that we have something of a bent towards aggro. Let's see what objectives we think make sense to include here. So surges, I think, are also usually more important to land initially, to just figure out where are we with surges before we decide end phase. Are there any surges that you feel are absolute must takes? We have to have them in the deck.
So I tend to favor the warband specific surges, and not just the surges, but I tend to look at what the warband wants to do by itself first.
Yep.
So just the ones that I saw that were at least very enticing were Quick to Judge and Eager Assistant.
Sure. You want to just read them out quick so people know what those are?
So Quick to Judge, first off, is score this immediately if there is a surviving friendly leader and 2 or more enemy fighters each have a condemned counter. And then Eager Assistant, score this immediately after a second or subsequent successful supported attack action made by friendly fighters in the same phase.
Okay. Skyler, any thoughts?
Yeah. So in preparation, looking at their card pool here, I had Quick to Judge called out as my favorite surge for them. Like, I think it's the best one in line with their natural game plan. Like, I think this is the card that you're going to, every one of their decks is going to bring this, I think. Sure. Because you don't need any successful attacks to make those condemned counters happen. You can have the scripter 3 away from somebody, and point them down, because that doesn't rely on a success. Little card play can get you that final 1-2, and hopefully your leader's surviving. Like, I think that this is just a really strong card for them.
Yeah. I mean, if your leader's dead, I think you're in trouble anyway, so I would agree. I also had this one on my short list. I think we can safely add this to the deck. Quick to Judge feels very strong. And I did not actually have Eager to Serve
or Eager Assistant
or Eager
to
Assistant.
Serve.
Did you have Eager Assistant, Skyler?
I did not. I dropped it from consideration due to the fact that it requires 2 supported attacks, and I just didn't know. I just didn't want to lean on that. Right? It's a lot of setup, and they have to be successful. So I'd rather lean on like the easier support surge in my mind is Bound in Servitude. I think this is going to be a staple we see from them too. A friendly chain rasps attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action, or a friendly fighter's attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action, and one or more friendly chain rasps supported that attack action. So we're getting this. It has to kill, which I suppose Eager Assistant doesn't have to do, but we're getting this off of one setup and success, potentially.
Yeah. So I had Bound in Servitude on my short list. I also was hesitant about having 2 successful supported attacks in a single phase. It is reminiscent. There's a card in Reavers that is actually a surge for 2 that you had to make 3 successful attacks, which is a bit more of an ask than 2 supported, but it tended to be a very frustrating card, and my gut was like, this is going to be the same thing, and it was going to be difficult. Josh, do you have any rebuttals to either of our thoughts on Eager Assistant?
Yeah, so my initial takeaway was hesitation. So don't get it twisted that I was super thrilled with this card.
Okay.
The biggest thing that drew me to it was it's a 2 glory surge.
Sure. Yeah.
And it falls in line with what they want to do anyway. So there is a lot of tech in their kit that is either giving supports or moving into position to be supporting. First 2 that come to mind are literally a ploy that is, you have 1 supporting off the rip. Can't think of it off the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll get to it in further discussion. And the other was a reaction ploy where you could react to a move and move to be in supporting position.
Sure. Yep.
So knowing that there was that and that there's other support tech in the universal pool, I was a little less hesitant, especially since it wasn't necessarily a kill surge. It was just, hey, you need to pick on 2 weak targets and make 2 successful attacks, which I'll grant you is a little more ASCII, but as I was looking through the others, I was not as keen on kill surges as opposed to just successful attack surges.
Yeah. And I definitely feel the support piece of their game plan making a lot of sense. So I definitely was thinking, okay, this is a possibility. But then, like I said, gut feel was it's risky.
I'm not entirely opposed to it because I think it's a card that if you plan to take it, you will be spending power, both probably in Gamut and Upgrade, to support it.
Sure.
I don't think you take it without power support.
I would agree with that. I think you're definitely wanting to support it a lot. If you go that direction, you are going that direction very hard. And I think that's something we could do.
It leans that aggro strategy almost instantly, which is another reason I kind of avoided it myself.
Sure.
In my considerations. Yeah. But,
about...
we can add it as because when we have 6 of these, I assume we don't quite stop. We kind of get to that 7, 8 and then tune down.
Yes, of course. So I think I was going to say the same thing. Let's put it as a maybe, and then we'll keep going, and we'll see once we get to 7 or 8 of these, and we're feeling like, hey, these are the ones we want. Does it still fit?
Yeah, and for those deck builders out there, that is how I operate when I deck build in general. Is I'll kind of create what I imagine my surge pool might be, and then I dive into power and see how I can support it, and then that will ultimately help me tune out a few cards.
Absolutely.
On that note, what was the other one that you guys were hot on? We can always add that to the list and do the same.
Bound in Servitude.
Yeah, this is kill surge. We have supporting chain rasp, or
the chain
get
rasp.
The kill with the chain rasp, which
yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe, but
yeah.
I think it's still, I think both modes are doable, and I think there's actually some ways that you could use like weapons or something to make first mode fairly doable too. So
not to jump straight out of their own surge pool, but while we're on the topic of support, I would like to bring up Loyal Allies. It's a card I've quite fallen for in the championship format because it doesn't require a successful attack, and I think it does work really well with their support play as well. And I've got some other justifications for it down the line too, but it is a friendly fighter's attack or defense roll, and I really like that flexibility here. Included one or more single or double support icons. It doesn't actually call them out as support successes. We're just looking for the icons on the dice. And one or more of those symbols was a success. So it's not saying support had to get it for you. Like from a defense standpoint, you could be in cover. You could have some sort of upgrades on you that grant you those facings as successes.
Sure.
So you've got a little flexibility to score it on the defense side, especially with, I think, this team. So it kind of ends up feeling a little bit like Contest of Equals with the right fuel, because you're going to get more shots at it than just the offensive shots.
That's a good call out. They do actually have a upgrade that works with that as well. So I actually like that one a lot. How do you feel, Josh?
It was on my short list too, so
All
I'm
right.
happy to include it.
Nice.
There's one in. So we're already starting to see kind of a theme here of doing some of the support stuff. One that I think also lends itself well, and maybe is just a strong card in general, is Gather a Crowd. So this
Agree.
is score this immediately after an activation step if there are 3 or more friendly fighters within 2 hexes of the same enemy fighter. That's a lot easier to do than it feels sometimes. And if you play enough push tech, I think you can manufacture this without much difficulty. What are you guys' thoughts on this one?
So I considered this one, and my only hesitation was it required 3 fighters to be alive.
So
Which, once you get to round 2, can be kind of an ask.
So I'm pretty hot on this one. And to leap straight off of that, if this was your typical 4-fighter warband, not in the Death Alliance, I would concur wholeheartedly. This would be a no-go for me. But the fact that, the wielder can resurrect on his own, and you can bring the in-faction resurrection as well as the Death Grand Alliance one, it becomes a card that's really attractive to me, because I think you can generally rely on 3 fighters at least through round 2, and I think that's long or far enough for a surge.
Yeah, and that was my thinking with this one as well. I mean, one, you can use push tech to make it happen, and if you're bringing resurrection stuff to support additionally beyond what the warband can do themselves, I actually do think that the chances of keeping 3 of your 4 fighters isn't too bad. So that was my take. I think definitely hear the concern of like, hey, you might run out of fighters to score this, and that is potentially a problem, but I think this one seems on paper strong enough that we should try it before we don't include it.
The thing that I hadn't considered while I was rocking this one was the actual ability that Terminus has, which is to summon immediately adjacent to that fighter.
Mm-hmm.
I had it in my head that the resurrection, most of the gambits are going to be in your territory. So that's where my hesitation was. But if you are bringing things back with the Headsmen, you're probably going to be within hexes of, other enemy fighters. So I'm a little more hot on this one.
We won him over, Phil.
Yeah, I think we can still leave this one as like a maybe mark, but I think I'm feeling pretty solid about it. I think this is a nice one that doesn't require any dice rolling.
On the topic of more of their in-house surges, I think Off With Their Head is such a fun card to the point where like I'm just tempted to run it because I think it's a blast. And like, get a kill with your leader. You want to do that. Like you're doing a lot to make that happen already. Yes, it's another kill surge, but they are they're pretty aggro in identity, right? So I think the fact that it also offers you the chance at an additional glory for taking their leader down makes it, I don't know, maybe a tad greedy, but definitely attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly a solid option. I think if we want to lean into getting a lot of kills with the wielder, then it is, like you said, it gives you that extra flex, so it can go to a 2 glory surge, which is really nice. I don't have any problem with including it. I think by the nature of this warband, you're going to have at least 1 kill surge, and that doesn't seem like a bad one to include. Your other options of kill surges would be things like In Cold Blood or Death's Champion. Obviously, we already mentioned Bound in Servitude, which is, potentially harder. So I don't think it's wrong to have it included. Josh, what do you think?
I don't hate it. I think
that is a ringing endorsement from
Josh. I would want to build into Terminus being just an absolute monster that you cannot bring off the table. Like, I would want to build more defensively and offensively, just basically making him a brick house before even considering that one. Because yeah, he's already pretty chunky and he wants to do kills, but yeah,
I think sort of the supporting point to that one though is like, if you're not getting kills with him, who are you getting kills with?
Valid.
It's a little bit like Mollog, where it's sort of like, is there really much chance that you're, getting kills with anybody else? And I think ultimately the answer to that is probably sometimes, but not often.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I'm still... It is a fighter-specific kill surge, and I'm always pretty hesitant on those.
I agree. Certainly not a huge fan of them, although I do think it will be tough to find a lot of strong surges for this particular warband that don't require your leader. I would say let's put it in as also sort of marked as a maybe, which I know we've now got a few in that same vein. But it feels like it has a lot of upside. So if we're already feeling like we want to sort of swing for the fences, kind of gamble a little bit, I don't think it's a wrong choice to include.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, this is the process, right? We'll get a good few maybes out there, get a cleaner picture as we get further down the deck. To that end, a few staples that we see in Championship in the Surge pool are Branching Fate,
yep,
and Contest of Equals. Now, I think for obvious reasons, we'll leave Branching Fate at home, but those who aren't familiar with Championship or Branching Fate, let me highlight that real quick. That is, I was going to do it from memory, but let me just punch it in. Here we are. So score this immediately after an attack action. If you roll 3 or more dice during the attack or defense roll, and they all show a different symbol. So normally you'll see this on warbands who have 3 attack dice in their inherent opening stats, and it becomes a pretty popular and reliable surge in that area. We only have 2 attack dice on all of our opening stat lines, though, so we're going to leave this one at home.
Yep.
But until we know what our restricted slots are going to look like, I recommend us tossing contest of equals into our maybe slots because it is annoyingly reliable until it isn't. And so,
Yeah.
for those who don't know, this is score this immediately after a failed attack action if the attack roll and the defense roll contain the same number of successes, including critical successes. So even if your opponent is the one performing the attack, if it fails due to the fact that you both rolled, 1 success each, or or even no successes, very commonly no successes on either side of the line, this will score.
It's very strong. I think you're right. We'd be remiss not to at least put it in to start and see where we end up with our restricted slots. I will say we haven't gotten there yet, but a lot of the Death Faction power cards are restricted. So that might be something that limits us, but I think we'd be remiss to not include this, at least initially. At this point, we've got a decent number. I only had a couple other things even included on my short list, and if we were to include one of them, that would start to lock us in from a plot card perspective. One that I have often seen work out much better than it seems on paper is Toyed With. Just happen to end up having somebody be vulnerable, and then you can score this, which is surprisingly easy to do sometimes. But that puts us in Tooth and Claw. How do you guys feel about that?
Into Tooth and Claw. Interesting. So this opens up the plot conversation, and I know next we'll start diving into end phase. And right now, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm building a championship deck in general, I'm having much more luck finding the surges I want to run than the end phases. And I'm finding that leads you to like really consider what end phase cards a plot can bring into the picture for you. And so when I sat down to do some considerations for the Headsman's Curse, I looked at the end phases for our 4 plot locked options right now. And I ended up passing on Tooth and Claw. So I didn't even consider Toyed With. I do like Toyed With. I think it's great. And I like the potential inclusion here. But, as kind of like a tease or a spoiler, no. I couldn't figure out what one I wanted to run with. I ended up settling on Fearsome Fortress myself.
Okay.
Yeah. And so from there, once I kind of figured out like, okay, these are kind of the end phases I want to augment in, then I was like, okay, are there any surges, kind of like a back step in the process that I might want from the Fearsome Fortress deck? And I was considering bringing in Earthworks. And the reason for that is they have an upgrade that we'll talk about by name later that after an attack can grant you a on guard token. And so I was thinking to myself, one, if I have to spend an activation putting somebody on guard, like that's worth it to me. And two, like if I have that particular upgrade, then that could just happen for me. And then I could start leaning into things like what is it? Siege Machines. No, that's not what it's called. There's there's an upgrade. It's the deck building process kind of ebbs and flows, between the columns as you're working on it. Siege Master. So
yeah, the reaction to put guard tokens.
Yep, which I think would be really strong on them because especially if you can get them inspired. Anytime you can change the dodge characteristic to also include the shield characteristic, that's a more meaningful on-guard benefit than the reverse, because you're getting an additional 2 sides versus just an additional 1. So for them, I thought that might be really big, and I kind of started leaning my whole like consideration for them into this counter punch where I'm going to try to maybe hold two objectives and maybe sit on midline and kind of flirt with your positioning and make you come to me, or at least have that as a launching point for further offensive. So I guess I kind of want to talk a little bit more about plot card with them right now.
Sure.
Where do you guys land on considerations with plot cards? I had a really hard time trying to figure out which one I thought would fit them best.
So I actually leaned away from what was it, Toyed With, for the exact same reason that you and Phil were leaning towards Off With Their Head, which was, if you're not swinging with Terminus, you're not really going to be putting people at just less than dead. You're going to be putting them at dead. That being said, I did lean into Tooth and Claw because of Embraced Savagery, which is a significantly more easy to score surge in the later parts of the game, and you have pretty much complete control over it.
Embraced Savagery is, again, for folks who don't
That
know.
is, for the listeners, that is, score this immediately after an activation if each surviving friendly fighter is savage.
So the reason I personally would keep something like Embrace Savagery out of this deck is because it dissuades you from using Terminus's bring back, the Blade Boundary action. So let's say you had charged this fighter you know what? But for an activation, I'm thinking kind of end phase. No, ignore me. Embrace Savagery is good. You're great.
I think
Thanks for saying so.
I think the only like downfall to Embrace Savagery is it tends to be, at least in round one, an end phase card, because you're not scoring it until right before the end phase, generally speaking, with a warband of 4.
I don't disagree with that. I do think it's fairly straightforward to do. You don't need dice, which is nice. I don't have a problem with it. I also leaned into Tooth and Claw just because I was having trouble finding something else that felt good. I kind of thought that maybe you could make something work with Void Curse Thralls, but I didn't have enough time to figure out what you would have to do, just because that one is very heady, and I haven't really gotten my arms around it yet.
So I've been experimenting with Void Curse Thralls quite a bit, and for them, if you kind of focus on like your Inspire as not a guarantee, which is kind of like if you're playing Dread Pageant, like Brian, he always talks about, whenever anybody asks him tips on Dread Pageant, he's like, you don't inspire. Like do not ever build a deck around like with any hopes included in the build that you will inspire, right? And I think if you lean Void Curse, you're kind of doing that to yourself here a little bit, simply because you're buffing their so the bearer of the block or the scripter's defense. If you pick anybody else, you're gimping their defense in round one, and then going forward, if you inspire, then you have your kind of like sacrificial lamb to give you access to Void Curse. So you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the fact that it's like, like I'm always going to have these 1 or 2 fighters in play to uphold the curse, and they're always going to have that defensive negative. It's a boon again, round 1, maybe even 2 before you can get inspired. But once you get inspired, you're bringing somebody down with it. So there's a lot of cool tricks in there, but I think most of what Void Curse has to offer is in the like power deck. I don't think it's in your scoring.
Sure.
Cool.
Well, I mean, great conversation about that. I think it kind of makes a clear argument for not taking that one. I mean, based on the discussion so far, two of us went with more aggro leaning, take Tooth and Claw, allow Wielder to become kind of the monster that you want him to be, and then the more flex option, which I don't think is wrong, but given that we have two people building one direction and one person going the other way, I think for tonight's purposes, let's go with Tooth and Claw.
Agree.
If you are okay with that, Josh.
I might actually be leaning the other direction.
Oh, you're changing your mind. Okay.
So the more we talk about aggro and how much it depends on like people being alive and successful attacks to, happen.
Sure.
I'm reminded of my time with the Gore Chosen.
Yep.
And early on, that was not a fun experience.
Sure.
And then I picked up Fearsome Fortress. And
All
that was more of an experience of, okay, I'm going to do the things that Fearsome Fortress want me to do, which, granted, Gore Chosen do also have baked in tech that want them to be in no man's land. But being able to be in no man's land first and punch second was way more reliable, I found.
Sure.
So Fearsome Fortress is my favorite plot card deck, period. So I just constantly feel like I have some bias towards it. So I was like, yeah, if we want to embrace something different for me, I'm on board. But it's also fun to hear somebody else go, oh, wait a minute. Sure, let's venture into that Fearsome Fortress.
And I think if we lean towards a what was the phrase used? Invade aggro with insurance. I'm on board with that.
Sure. And I think that can work. So let's do it. We'll lock it in. We're doing Fearsome Fortress. Yeah, we'll lock it in. Okay. So let's include Earthworks, and then we need to then know that our plan is to be in the middle, which means we are hanging out and counterpunching. That is probably a good thing because that gives us a direction to build towards for the rest of this deck.
One last question on that. What kept you guys away from Terran Delvers?
The thing that kept me away from Daring Delvers is a lot of hold in enemy territory, or have enough fighter. Like, my personal feeling is Daring Delvers, either you need to be leaning into the ping, or you need to be leaning into being able to sort of swarm into enemy territory to take advantage of having your exploration count for those surges that need your exploration count.
And neither of those are present in their base deck.
Yeah. I feel the same way.
If you can't do those things, you don't, in my opinion anyway, you don't take Daring Delvers. And I don't think these guys have those tools. Daring Delvers is my favorite plot deck, but I don't think these guys make good use of it.
No additional notes. That I concur.
If anyone listening strongly disagrees, please let us know.
When we were talking about Void Curse for a second there, I felt like Tynus von Artson for a second, just going mad with the experimentation I've been conducting.
All right.
It's okay. Your final lab notes are coming soon.
Assuming I survive.
So that then puts in Earthworks. The only other one then that I had potentially listed as a surge, and I think then we should move on to end phases, was Carve a Path, and I think that we are definitely leaning away from that as an option. Correct me if I'm wrong in thinking that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. I say we throw it out. All right, so let's just quickly recap what we've got for surges. We have 8 listed at the moment. We've got Contest of Equals, Staple, Restricted, Earthworks, solid, doesn't require dice rolling. Loyal Allies, where we need supports. Bound in Servitude, where we are trying to do more support stuff. Eager Assistant, again, we're doing more support stuff. Gather a Crowd, where we're sort of being around. And actually, this probably works fairly well with standing in the middle, because your opponent will naturally be close to you, and kind of have to come to you, because if they just let you stand around in the middle without contesting it, it tends to go badly for them. Off with Their Heads, Kill Surge, and Quick to Judge, which again, we're trying to just do the condemn thing, which this one seems like a no-brainer. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, are the ones that are currently listed as sort of our least guaranteed would be Off with Their Head and Eager Assistant.
I'd add Earthworks in there as a maybe. So the Surge department isn't necessarily what I was looking at this for.
Does it give us more passive scoring, though?
It does. I do like it. I think it's pretty great here, but we can keep it in the maybe column.
I suppose we could wait to thin things out until later. My personal feeling is that when in doubt, take out Kill Surges. There's just chances that you don't have them in hand when you need them, and it makes things smoother, I think, when you can score without getting kills. But we'll sort of see where the rest of the deck takes us.
All right.
Sound good?
That sounds great.
All right. End phases then. So I will say right off the bat, now that we are not in aggro land, I'm not 100% sure where we want to be. But I think keeping with our start, I think to Josh's point, when we started with the Surges, starting with some of the in-faction cards, I personally felt like one that felt like a good inclusion, and there's multiple cards like this, but the in-faction version is Judge Lest Ye Be Judged, which is score in an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter has a move or charge token. I think more often than not, you'll be at least repositioning most of your fighters, which will get you all those move tokens. And in the late game, these become pretty trivial because you'll have usually one or two fighters.
So my only hesitation with this one was very similar to Skyler's hesitation earlier, which was if you are leaning into any sort of resurrection that clears move and charge tokens.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I actually tossed it simply because, so this is actually what I was trying to arrive at with what was the Savage, Embrace Savagery?
Yeah, Tooth and Claw. Yeah.
This is where I was trying to arrive at. Yep. So I actually slotted this in immediately because it's very similar to Move or Die, which I think is reliable in a count of a 4 warband or less generally. But yeah, as soon as you start throwing Resurrection into the mix, it becomes much less reliable.
Oh, that's a good point. Then forget I said anything. Where would you guys like to start?
Yeah, so leaning into Resurrection, I brought 2 of their end phases, both to Glory, that I think if we lean into a Resurrection package, then are very stable or reliable.
Can I guess what they are?
Yeah, please.
Are they all Rise and Tools of Death?
They are indeed.
I love them both.
Would you go ahead and read those for the audience?
Yeah, I absolutely will. So All Rise is score this in an end phase if, and it's a hybrid, so 2 or more friendly fighters each have 1 or more raise counters, or 1 or more friendly fighters are out of action, and 1 or more friendly fighters each have 1 or more raise counters. So it's raise 2, which, if you're having a bad day, that's not the worst thing to score 2 glory off of. Or kill one and raise one. So, not bad. I think the only thing that I'm a little stuck on is whether or not raise counters persist. I have yet to find anything that says that they do, and if any listeners would like to lend a guy a hand, that would be super helpful. If they do persist and they stay when the fighter dies, this is almost an auto include.
I don't think they
opinion.
do, but if you're bringing power support, partial resurrection, and we'll read these cards later. They're in faction 1. One or both of those, save that right before end phase.
Even if they do clear, I think it's very enticing, especially with the right card support. But if they don't get cleared, this should be in almost every deck.
Agree. Yeah, and I think they do, but
I think spoilers for folks at home. We discussed this offline before recording. I think based on the way that the rulings on fighters being taken out of action clearing counters is in the rulebook, that yes, in fact, these would get cleared. If you have reason to think otherwise, please let us know. But I think that is how this would work. But to the points made already, every time you revive a fighter, they'll be getting a raise counter, so there's really no downside. I think there'd be very little way to benefit from having the raise counters even when they're dead. So I think this is still strong. I had this one on my list.
I think it's especially strong because it's one of those cards where if you aren't able to score it, things are going well.
Fair.
That's actually a good point. Not something we talk about a lot, but it's sort of like, hey, if I don't score this, it means I'm probably doing what I need to. Either that or everybody's just having a giant whiff fest and nothing's happening in the game. And,
but at least then you're not the only one bad things are happening to.
It can be a little bit problematic if they are like not hitting their attacks but holding objectives or something. But I think that's not something we can really worry about. Tools of Death. Did you already read this one off?
We haven't read that out.
I did not. We got so excited about All Rise.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is score this in an end phase if 3 or more surviving friendly fighters each have 1 or more upgrades. Yeah. For 2 glory. If it was 1 glory, oh my gosh, you'd leave this at home. But for 2, it just seems really attractive. You're gonna have to get some fuel ahead of it, sure. But that could be 2 surges and a kill. That could be, just not drawing Tools of Death in round 1. It's the type of card that, when you see in your opening hand, you have to think about if there's enough there to support it or if a mulligan is necessary. But I think it's, when it's only looking at surviving fighters and upgrades, it's just going to be, not dice, related and more reliable for you.
Yeah, we've seen stuff like this in the past. Either the have 1 on everyone or stack 3 on 1 tend to be pretty straightforward, tend to be hard to counterplay. The, of course, only trick being they have to be surviving, but since we're planning on taking stuff to revive and their faction is inbuilt to have some ways to revive, I don't think that is a problem. One thing that can, become tricky with this is if you have a lot of upgrades that you want to all go on one fighter. So we kind of have to be cognizant of not becoming a Voltron build because this would be kind of a non-bow with that. But I don't think that's too much of a problem. I think there's a lot of generically good upgrades that we can include that you would put on just about anybody. All right, well, let's put those 2 in for sure. Where to go next? One that I couldn't decide on, and you guys maybe can talk me out of because I'm feeling like it's maybe not that great. Triumph of Death. So this is an end phase where you score it where there are one or fewer surviving enemy fighters, which already feels very hard. And then there are two or more surviving friendly fighters. I think having two surviving friendly fighters isn't that unlikely given that you're able to revive. It's the one or fewer surviving, to me, feels risky. And it kind of, in my mind, makes this feel a little bit like a third end phase, but it is for 3 glory. So
let me talk to you instead about our Lord and Savior, Path of Death.
Sure, I also had that one on my list.
I love that card way more, especially now that we're doing Fearsome Fortress, because we can do a little bit more gatekeeping instead of diving into aggro.
Yep.
And the only thing that jumps to mind with, was it one or fewer surviving or two or fewer surviving enemy fighters? One or fewer is Gits.
Well,
sure. You can. I know that's just one warband in particular, but that's 9 bodies that have to hit, or excuse me, 8 bodies that have to hit the floor over the course of 12 activations.
You know what's actually a bigger argument against this, and I can't believe I didn't think about it sooner. Triumph of Death shouldn't be taken because people run warbands with revive.
Exactly. I was just
like Exile Dead exist. Right? Triumph of Death shouldn't ever be taken. I don't know what I was thinking.
So nope, that's all right. I was between body counts and people that have multiple bodies to count, it's rough.
Yeah, so I don't think you should ever limit your build on one warband unless you're confident you're going to see them at whatever event you're bringing a deck to, right?
But there's multiple warbands that can revive. So
right, exactly. So with Triumph of Death, it's not just one with revival like you just said, but it's also just a big ask with Swarm in general, and I think we're seeing Swarm hold really come back right now. So
sure.
Yeah, cool.
Skyler, what are your thoughts on Path of Death then?
Path of Death. I don't have much experience with it. I looked at it and I thought to myself, "Ooh, 3 glory!" And like I don't personally have actually never really played in Death, so I was like, there are no enemy fighters in your territory or no one's territory. For me, that's generally just a non-starter. That's just not how I like to operate. I know I said don't bring cards that can be countered by like a single warband. But I always have Soul Raid in the back of my head. I always think that they're meta relevant. And
they
so
will stop this cold.
Exactly. The fish can just show up and be like, ha, Path of Death, what? So I don't know. I'm never really hot on gating cards. So especially in best of threes, like I actually played a game this morning where the first game was really tight. But my opponent over the course of our first game, had scored these cards that showed me that he didn't want me in his territory. Then during our second game, I knew exactly how to counter him and was able to, take advantage of that, constantly, hold myself just over the line into his territory and, really prevent that scoring. So I just generally don't keep gated territory cards in my decks.
Sure.
But I could be talked into this one. I've seen Josh do it, extraordinarily. I think if you one of the difficulties with it and going, I think one of the difficulties in general actually is if you're not guaranteed to set up the boards, you're not guaranteed to set up a choke point, and therefore they can just kind of scoot past you.
Sure. So let me begin the process of talking you into this.
Okay.
The reason I like this, and even in a best of 3 format, I loved this during the team tournament that we did because it makes my opponent make a choice. If we're doing a somewhat counter-punchy build where we want to have that insurance, we want to be able to score things if they don't come to us, this is a loaded cannon. This is, if you do not come to me, you will suffer 3 glory.
Josh, you're talking me into this. So I will have to admit, after everything I said, I included siege breakers in my maybe category to try to build a reason for people to come to you in a best of 3.
Well, I think that is as resounding of a argument for Path of Death as we can have, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Siege
I would
Breakers
agree.
is probably slightly worse, and does a similar thing.
agree.
All right.
So the question is, do we double down on siege breakers?
No.
I think that's too much because if your opponent knows you're bringing both, then they're like, well, now I have to stop it.
I can't do it, Josh.
Well, and then it's like, okay, so then if they do decide I need to deny these, that's 5 glory out of the deck, right?
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
it becomes too easy. The math is too easy. It's like, oh, of course I'm going to deny 5 because like if it doesn't work, I guess I'm dead. If it works, they probably lose.
True.
Whereas
And then you just fixate on a like full aggro, and if you haven't built for that, you're gonna have a bad time.
right.
You know, one thing I'll give credit to Path of Death for is even against somebody like Soul Raid, Grimwatch, Spiteclaw Swarm, who can just kind of boop, appear in your territory. Path of Death is any end phase, which
Yep.
It
is incredible for 3 glory. So
that means you basically have to have somebody committed to being in enemy territory
at the right,
all 3 rounds, basically,
to make sure that they catch it at the right time. Yep, absolutely. All right, you've convinced me, Josh. You've won me over.
All right, good deal. So starting to look at other options, and other options that are in our plot locked options. Is Conquered Domain just an auto include?
Auto.
Okay. Put it in. I was thinking, why wouldn't you have it if you're running it? Like it's so easy for folks who haven't played with this before. There's a score that's in an end phase. If there is a friendly fighter on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory, gain 1 additional glory point for each other friendly fighter on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory. So starts out as a 1 glory end phase that can fairly easily flex up to 2, and then in some pretty unlikely but possible scenarios, 3, 4 plus.
I've scored 4 with the thorns. It was rude.
Nice. I like it. That actually gives us quite a bit of end phase glory. Where else are you guys looking to grab some end phases?
Yeah, so I kind of leaned into the headspace of a hold to like punch pack if we were hanging out in the center line.
Sure.
So I thought about we'll toss these in the maybes camp. The stockpile, where you're holding objectives that number up to 6. Generally, you're not holding more than 2 to make that happen. And they have a confusion that I can't wait to talk about that can really help secure this. They've got good movement speed. So if we're kind of camping out center, then we could always just move to where we need to make stockpile happen. That's 2. In the same vein, instead of looking for, numerical value, Path to Victory exists, where, we're holding 2 again, here, but the only requirement in addition is that we've gotten a kill within the phase, which is part of their game plan. So I kind of added these both as my hold to counterpunch, flex build ideas. They're never far away when I'm considering a flex build.
Yeah. I often worry about, and I've just not really ever played it, but I always worry a little bit about stockpile, just getting the math to work. But I think the more I've sort of seen games play out, getting to 6 isn't actually that hard most of the time. You can get really unlucky and end up with, 1 and 2, and then it becomes hard. But I think more often than not these days, that isn't usually too big of a concern. And if we are really worried about it, we can bring some power cards to try and make that easier.
A point in the cons column for that in the meta right now is you're probably going to run up against Pandemonium in an event, and they have they have a gambit that they're probably taking that's going to allow them to switch to 2 feature tokens or
Steal
objective
away
tokens.
From you.
Yep. And so not only could they use that for their own benefit because they're trying to get to 9 that they're holding, but they could use it as a counterplay against Stockpile. So I'm kind of talking myself out of Stockpile, to be frank.
Okay. I don't have any problem with oh man, what's it called? You were just talking about it.
Path to Victory.
Path to Victory. I don't have a problem with that one. Josh, what are your thoughts?
As I'm thinking on Path to Victory and Stockpile, I'm looking at the rest of it, and we have a lot of counter but no punch.
Well, I feel the punch is in the power department, is in your fighter profiles. It's not really in your
we're not leaning into it for scoring, but we're still trying to get kills.
What I'm saying is, if we run up against a hold warband with this this deck as it stands right now, we don't have anything that rewards us for going in and rooting that out.
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. The reward in and of itself, in that case, is that you're stopping your opponent from scoring.
Right. So hold scores high to offset exactly what Phil's saying.
And we're trying to hold in the middle, right?
Right.
Now, we won't out-hold. That's for sure, right? If we just sit there and are like, all right, we're going to get Conquered Domain, we're going to get Path to Victory. They're probably going to get... they could potentially get Claim the Prize for 3. They could get, their in-faction holds if they're a Swarm hold warband. They could get Supremacy. All of a sudden, it could explode on you if you don't, go tap into their game plan. But I think that's, a side effect of just playing this warband in general, is you're going to have to be prepared to forgo some of your, you kind of want to make some of this a little flexible so that when you interfere with their game plan, you can still rely on a little bit of this.
I think most of this still works. Like, if you have to move in and, steal one of their objectives because they're a hold warband, that's still fine.
And then that works towards Path to Victory.
And you're also still denying their glory, and if your way of getting into enemy territory to disrupt them is by killing them off the objectives, then we've got stuff that's rewarding you for getting those kills as well.
If you want a little bit of punch in your end phase, the greedy cards that I took, and then this and this is kind of like the end of the pool. The end phase considerations I have is superiority confirmed. A friendly leader is in enemy territory, and the wound characteristics of enemy fighters that are out of action adds up to 4 or more. I really love the flexibility there on what they're asking for you to have out of action on your opponent's side. So you can, kill a couple, 2 healthers, 3 healthers, to make that happen. Or you can go for one target, a 4 or greater. And
I was about to say, that's a Stormcast on order.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. So I've got that in there. And then if I don't have a good third end phase in mind for a deck, I almost always flirt with and consider Great Gains.
I
had that in my initial grouping, but if we're doing a counterpunch where the flex is a little more present. I don't know that I like it in the initial pass of this deck.
I agree. It almost always makes my like maybe if I can't find a third end phase. And for those who don't know, Great Gains is score this in an end phase. If you scored 5 or more glory points in this round, the beauty of this card is you can pace it when you're scoring. So in an end phase, you can reveal additional cards that can get you to that 5 before you put down Great Gains to score. So it can be a boon of 2. But it is the type of card that can sit in your hand and stare you in the face like a third end phase card can do, right? So I never really like having both in the deck because it's pretty much, a guaranteed recipe for them to end up in your hand and for you to be bricked and frustrated.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea. I hadn't initially included it, but I had looked at it when I was initially building. Superiority confirmed there will be times where you draw this later in the game, and all you have to do is just move your leader into enemy territory. The final activation of a round, you move them in and just say, all right, there I go. I get 2 glory. Now, of course,
there will be times you draw it in the third end phase and your leader's dead.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the flip side, right? Is that it's risky. I say we include it as a maybe, and we leave it there as a thing we consider. I'm not sold on it, but I don't hate it, and it feels like one that we could, depending on where we want to land on the flex, I think it's a possible option.
Josh, would you be a deer and get rid of Stockpile? I've talked myself so out of it. I don't want to look at it in our consideration pool.
Oh my, strong feelings.
Done and done.
I think your statement about it being potentially hard countered by Ephelims is maybe. I know we've already said we don't want to say there's a gatekeeper for a specific objective, but it does feel like a strong argument against it. And
I think Ephelims in this matchup is going to be one where you're going to have to bring the fight to them. This is not going to be one where you're going to be able to sit in no man's land and do a little dance and then punch them. That's going to be one where you have to get them off the table early.
I don't disagree with that. So, I mean, I think there's a range of how flexy you can be. I think, as we mentioned, the aggro with a backup plan feels nice in that a lot of these you can pick up sort of as you move forward, which is a nice thing to have as an aggro warband, because sometimes, especially against a warband like Ephelims, where they know they don't need to engage, is that they'll just sit back and be like, okay, come to me. You have to, because if you don't, I'm just going to score all this stuff that I don't need to engage with you with. And it gives you a few glory as you walk towards them. So I like having a few of these options. Stockpile is probably not that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be opposed to keeping it in the maybes, but if you're really against it, Skyler, we can leave it off.
My thought on that is Ephelims, if they're including 9 fates, they want 4 and 5. So they're going to, if they have the opportunity, they're going to yoink you off of that.
Yeah, or even if you're in a best of 3.
You're trying to use 3 cards or 3 tokens to score a 2 glory. It's rough.
Yeah, and when you're building a meta relevant deck, I think the one exception, right, to hey, don't be afraid to bring a card that one warband can counter, right? And then, just kind of brace yourself for that, have a backup plan for how you personally are going to navigate that. Because you can always counterplay, you can always work against, you can know right out of the gate, in this matchup, this card's dead. So what can I make dead, for them in this matchup?
Yep.
That's normally how you want to navigate that. But when that the meta sees a lot of a warband, you're pretty confident, you have a good feeling, I'm going to see this warband. That's when the exception kind of comes in. It's like, Ephelims really hot right now. Okay, I'll keep potentially stockpile out of the mix, because they're just going to be able to remove this for me in each of those games I play against them.
Sure.
And particularly when it's a card that was already kind of iffy. Like, I was still already on the fence about a card that required 2, maybe hold 3 objectives. That's definitely when that comes into play.
All right. Any other considerations for end phase?
I'm tapped.
Tapped
6.
out. Sounds good. I'm in the same boat. I feel like there was not as many available options here. So by my count, and you guys can correct me, we've got 6 on the end phase. We've got Path to Victory, Path of Death, Conquered Domain, Superiority Confirmed, All Rise, and Tools of Death.
That is what we got.
So with those in mind, does that leave anything in the surges that sort of starts to feel like an immediate cut?
Great question.
So I am less on it about Eager Assistant, because now we've edged into, okay, I need to secure objective / feature positioning and support positioning. That's a big ask for one game.
Agree.
Sure. Let's cut it.
Yep.
And then to that same thought, I think things like which one's which? We've got Bound in Servitude.
I think Bound in Servitude's living on borrowed time right now.
That's sort of my feeling too. It's for the same reason, right? It's like, if we need to stand on those feature tokens, how often are we going to be able to force the supports? And like, will we want to? I'm not sure that we immediately cut it, but it feels like it's a little rough. Off with Their Head could also still come out, but I'm not. Let's just leave it with these 7, and we can figure out which one comes out once we've finished the power cards.
Okay.
Because I think that'll probably make it pretty clear as to which one is the one on the outs.
I agree.
All right. So we'll get into gambits now. And I think that given where we've sort of ended up, we're going to need a lot of pushes. So I would suggest we start with any strong pushes in their faction cards. I know they have a few. What do you guys see as potentially good options for pushes?
The pushes that I saw were not that great.
Yeah, so I would
They were
almost
all ones where I was like, these are nice to haves in like Nemesis and Rivals decks, like very useful tools, but they were the like push tech we have at home kind of thing.
I concur. Yeah,
Okay.
I think when you're talking about what they have to offer from a faction standpoint, in the push department, you should you can reframe that conversation to the reposition conversation, because I agree wholeheartely with you, Josh, that they're the pushes that we have at home, right? You'd rather take a sidestep over a couple of their options that are only pushing a fighter 1, but only if these conditions are met.
Yeah.
Right. So you'd rather pick an omnidirectional sidestep over those.
The only one that I was hard pressed not to cut was Condemned Step Forward, which is confusion, and it's a little more strict because you can't use it on 2 of your fighters, but you also give the enemy or enemies that you chose condemned counters, which works towards some of our goals in our objectives.
Yeah, I included that one as well. I think that's in line with our game plan.
All right, let's take it then. I had that one as well. I think it's solid. It'll work well into this strategy. I think it worked well before for aggro as well, but I think it's just a good card. looking back at these cards again, I see what you mean. You can just take universal pushes to do a lot of the same things. So I don't see those as being particularly strong. I suppose one thing we kept talking about, we should probably just start by including all of the resurrection surges. So partial resurrection, and is there another one? I thought there was. Or is that the other one?
I don't think there's a universal additional one, but there's You Must Serve within their deck.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I think you need both.
I think so too. So partial is place one friendly fighter that is out of action on a starting hex in your territory. Give that fighter one raise counter, or raise token, sorry. Then give that fighter wound counters until that fighter is vulnerable. And then You Must Serve is place a friendly chain rasp that is out of action on a starting hex in your territory. So same shtick there. Give that fighter one raise counter. Then if there are 4 surviving friendly fighters, give that fighter wound counters until that fighter is vulnerable.
Yeah, it's just the thing where they don't want you to lose a fighter and immediately bring them back and be back to full strength, right? So there's that slight downside if you use it with only one fighter out of action.
So I think there's a conversation to be had now that we've kind of talked about doing a counterpunch, and that is Reborn in Darkness.
Remind us,
so
what
for
does that
those
do?
at home, this is a reaction card, and you play this after you give a friendly fighter a raise token, and you place that fighter in a cover hex. Normally, we would be resurrecting on a starting hex in our territory or adjacent to the terminus when he does his reaction. So I think being able to raise and place a fighter right where we typically want him is up for discussion, at least.
Yeah, I like it as a maybe for sure.
I think it is potentially solid. I think there's room to use it as a surprise. Your opponent could be in a situation where they think, I don't need to really worry about defending that unheld token in no one's land because their fighters are out of action and they can only revive onto one of their starting hexes. And then suddenly you're like, nope, I revive and get to place them onto the cover hex.
Yeah, that gets you into a place for Conquer Domain. And because Path to Victory is the only thing that we need actual objective facings for, we can, tilt the paintings as we go down the hallway. And by that, I mean, we can, going into end phases, if we don't have Path to Victory in our hand, we can delve the objectives to the cover side to help continue to give this breath.
Sure. So let's put it in. I do think having the in-faction way to resurrect a fighter makes the card much more palatable. If you had to do it with power cards, I'd feel pretty iffy, but I think as it stands, that is a solid choice. So that puts us up already to 4. What else do we feel we need? I feel like we still need just regular pushes. What are the kinds of pushes you guys think make sense?
So before we talk about pushes, I would like to just dwell a little bit longer on partial resurrection.
Okay.
Hot take here. With the prevalence of ping in the meta, I don't think this should be a restricted card.
Sure, right. Sure. I mean, you could make that argument, but also being able to bring fighters back from the dead is very powerful. So
it is strong. Being able to, especially if that your opponent does not have said ping in it, but when your opponent does have ping, you bring them back and they're just like, ha, thank you for the glory and your spend power card. It's rude. It's real rude.
With that that is something I want to keep in mind as we continue to build out, because that could potentially help cut partial. I think we still take it, but There are so many pings in the game right now where like it doesn't matter what plot deck you're taking, you're getting access to a plot locked ping, and you're also like have universal ping available to you beyond that. So it's one of those things where if we do bring it, and again, I do think we should, you got to be really careful with the timing of it to prevent that feel bad and that wasted attempt with it.
I certainly see the arguments against it. I still think that we have enough stuff in the deck where we're going to want it. There's stuff like All Rise, Tools of Death. Like, I think that the pros outweigh the cons, at least in my mind right now. I think we still keep it in. And obviously we can change our minds down the line, but I'd be hard pressed to cut it right now.
Okay.
I think you play it much more carefully than maybe you would in the past. But I think a lot of the pings are not just like deal damage to anyone anywhere. There is positioning related. So if you just need another fighter alive, you can place them in a pretty safe place at the end of the round and probably guarantee your end phases still score, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And generally, you're going to get a good read on if their pings have been spent by that time.
Or just how many power cards they have left in hand.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Well, to circle back to pushes, and repositioning in general, actually, one of their in-faction cards I had in my short list was Hold Them Still. So this is a reaction.
Yes.
Play this after a friendly fighter's move action. If they are adjacent to one or more enemy fighters, choose another friendly fighter. The chosen fighter makes one move action, and that after that move action, the chosen fighter must be adjacent to one or more of those enemy fighters. So move into an enemy and then bring in your support.
Yeah. I think this is solid. I think there will be times where you can actually use this to like jump on multiple feature tokens. There will be times where you're getting onto one feature token and bringing in a supporting fighter. Since this isn't restricted to things like chain rasps, you could even use this as a way to get the boss into position. Now, admittedly, that would mean that the boss isn't making any attacks in that activation, but I do kind of like the idea of putting him into a position where he can swing without charging. So I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I, for similar reasons, had counter charge in the deck as a shortlisted option, but it's a bit more restricted because it's queued off of an opponent's charge rather than a move on your side. So
I do love that card. I brought so that can be a potential push to 3 counter charge, right?
Yep.
So Commanding Stride was on my short list because of how integral to your game plan your leader is. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so that's push your leader up to 3 hexes. After this push, your leader must be in a starting hex. So I was thinking, if you need to get, you're in a matchup where, or a situation even where you just need to get that extra mileage out of your leader, Commanding Stride can really set that up for you, whether that's keeping you from charging, and still getting you the attack that you need, or you're charged out and you need to move around the board a little bit, then this can be huge. A push to 3, potentially.
Yeah.
What it doesn't do is it doesn't help with, I suppose Conquer Domain or Path to Victory, right? Because you're not going to be able to use Commanding Stride to get yourself onto those objectives.
Unless we want to bring stuff to move the objectives around. I don't know that we want to skew that hard into those things, but it is a possibility.
Sure.
Josh, any thoughts on either of those options?
Countercharge, I think, fits because we can use that to our advantage. The only thing that is going to really hold me back from Commanding Stride is that we want to be in no man's land where starting hexes aren't exactly where we want to be. it can help with some early repositioning and some later game get off the objectives and do a murder, but it's not going to be as effective as it normally would be.
Okay.
So I think it makes it to the maybe pile, but it might not be as useful as we would normally think.
Sure. I'm actually not sold on either option as being like necessary, but I think they're both strong pushes. So I had included them as maybes. Let's put them in as maybes just for now, and we can come back to them.
So, two other pushes, because I generally kind of like build a push picture. Like here's kind of the push options I can potentially bring with this particular warband. You know, a lot of times that's very universal. Like you could bring sidestep, right? It usually ends up in the maybe bin right out of the gate. But additional ones I thought about for this warband, I'm getting to play with death. I don't normally get to play with death. Is lethal advance. It's leader restricted, and it has that box. So I like that because it's salvageable if your leader is down. And this is push up to 2 friendly fighters within 2 hexes of your leader, 1 hex towards the nearest enemy fighter. I generally think you're going to be kind of moving as a group. You're going to kind of be within 2 of your leader a lot of the time, I think. I thought this could be potentially powerful. You know, the opportunity to push up to 2 friendly fighters is generally really good. In a similar vein, another leader restricted push is Inspired Command. Choose 1 friendly fighter other than your leader and pick one. Push the chosen fighter 1 hex, or give the chosen fighter 1 guard token. If we're including Earthworks in our deck, this was in my short list because it's flexibly a sidestep as long as your leader is alive, a guard token to get your Earthworks if, again, your leader's alive, and if your leader's not, you can salvage this. So my short list for sure.
I agree.
I like that, actually. I think that's a strong option. Having the synergy of being both a push or a way to pick up Earthworks in the power step. I like it.
I agree. I think another push/reaction worth considering is Mirror Move, especially for doing counterpunch. I think being able to be like, yeah, okay, you pushed me off of that objective with a drive back, or off of that token with a drive back. I'm going to reposition you into a not so good spot and take your life. So there's that.
I'm never opposed to Mirror Move.
Same. I think it's always playable.
So on the topic of building out a push picture, I think we've kind of actually really done that here. We've got at least 5, maybe 6.
One thing that I would like to talk about is center of attention. I don't think it makes it to this list now because it doesn't provide much choice. It has a way of being able to get into its own way. I had it included when we were doing a lot more aggro because I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to both bring the party to me and pull people off of objectives. But now that it seems like we're going to be in the middle and maybe venturing into enemy territory a little bit more as it pleases us, I would definitely not in favor of any of the others.
I concur, oddly enough, and center of attention may be it's one of my top favorite cards in the game. So it's always weird leaving it out of a deck.
As I was building, it was easily one of the first cards that made it into my ploy stack.
Yeah.
But now that we've gone this direction, it does have a place.
It is certainly a counter play card. I think especially in this build, there's almost always room for it, but I think you're right that it's got diminishing returns with this play style, so we probably leave it off for now. And I think you're right as well, Skyler, in that we now have quite a few push options, and we should probably start looking at other things. There's other utility pieces. There's other accuracy boosts. I'm not sure which direction you guys want to lean. I think maybe we take a couple of each, personally.
Sure.
So one of the things that should always be up for discussion when you're taking a Death Warband is Death Soldiers.
Yep.
It is restricted for a reason.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
So for those folks keeping score at home, Death's Soldiers is play this only in your power step. You can use the following reaction. This effect persists until the end of the round or until you use this reaction. And that reaction is, use this during an attack action that targets a friendly fighter after the attack roll. That attack action has -1 damage to a minimum of 1 until it has been resolved.
Yeah, just a use it when you need it, -1 damage. It's incredibly powerful. I think you definitely just put it in for now until we see that we need the restricted slot, right?
I think so too.
I think so too. Getting to play with death again. I love Plunder the Graves so much. Shuffle your power, discard pile face down, then draw the top card, return that card to your hand. This could bring back a raise or a clutch push. I know that there's some RNG involved in Plunder the Graves, but I just really like that card.
It's one I haven't ever played with. In concept, I really like it. I think that late in the game, it's probably not very good, but early in the game, it can be extraordinarily powerful because you have so few choices of what you're going to get back that it ends up being a situation where it's like, well, I'm probably getting what I want. So I don't hate it. I think it's a strong utility piece.
For some other options, I'll toss out Unexpected Ally. Made my consideration list for the purpose of things like, any of the surges that we end up keeping that require support. And so Unexpected Ally reads, choose a friendly fighter. The chosen fighter is considered to have one additional supporting fighter when making a range 1 or range 2 attack action. But hold on. This effect persists until the chosen fighter makes a successful range 1 or range 2 attack action.
Sure.
So I love the persist until successful attack here. So it could help you with Bound in Servitude or Loyal Allies.
Yep. It also just gets you condemn counters for their Inspire.
Yes.
If the attack is supported, they can get an additional one. So
yes,
that's solid. And then just it's an accuracy boost, right? I mean, it's not a plus dice, but it's still an accuracy boost. So we'll need at least a couple of those, I think. So I like it. I think it synergizes pretty well.
So one more to toss out. Not an accuracy boost, and maybe not actually a card that belongs in this build as we're running it down. But a card I tossed in really quickly was Scapegoat. I love Scapegoat, but I'm hesitant to include it here, oddly enough. It is choose an enemy fighter. The chosen fighter has a wounds characteristic of 5, unless it would be higher. This effect persists until the end of the round. Give the chosen fighter 1 stagger token and 1 condemned counter. So I love that this can be monumental towards their game plan. They can any fighter they choose to toss a Headsman's Curse. I feel like most people who are familiar with Headsman's Curse, they know that this card could be coming. And so they have to hesitate, like, who am I willing to put out? Because if they put out somebody on 1 dodge, then all of a sudden they've built you the perfect fighter that you can turn large, potentially get 2 glory off of, and inspire off of. And you're getting accuracy in the stagger as well.
Yep. A side benefit of stagger is that they can't delve. So if your opponent has decided to delve things into cover and then later they're like the next round they're wanting to be able to flip it back because they're like, okay, I'll take advantage and then I want to hold later. You can stop that with this. We do want to give condemned counters, so giving condemned counters just on any enemy fighter is solid. And if somebody, say somebody already has a large wound count, or maybe even just 4 wounds, but they're wounded already, close to death, so that one more hit would always kill them, you can play Scapegoat on them, still have them be within range of getting killed in one hit, but then you get the extra glory for making them large. I like it. It was in my short list.
Cool.
Unless Josh has strong opinions to not take it, I think this one's it's a decent play.
It's conversation worthy for sure. I'm hesitant to give fighters wounds when they don't need it, but I mean, when it does tap out, that is an extra glory, and there aren't very many ploys that just straight up provide more glory.
So I don't, to the point of like, I don't want to give extra wounds. I don't think you would ever play this in a situation where you're not going to kill the fighter anyway. If this is going to prevent them from dying, I don't know that you would put this out there. If your intent is to kill the fighter, I should say. I think there's situations where you care more about condemned and stagger than you do about getting the kill. Like if you knew you needed 2 hits to kill them anyway, do you care if you gave them 1 extra wound?
Right. Well,
valid.
And let's say you're relying on the Sharpener, who's the only fighter I just checked that has Grievous amongst them, right? And you're like, okay, like Grievous, could get me this large fighter kill. Well, if it doesn't, and you scapegoated them into large, well, at the end of the round, they're going to die anyways, right? Because you brought them up to that large threshold. In this scenario, I'm saying like, they had 1 damage to go normally. And then you, for some reason, needed the Sharpener, to either do the 1 for 4, to get them there, or, Grievous to get that extra, greedy 5. At the very least, when the card pops, they go back to their normal stats. They still have their wounds on them, right? They're still going to die. I guess a better example would be if you're going to need 2 hits on them, you get the 1 and you don't get the second. Again, they'll return to their original stat line and could potentially still die, and give you the condemned stuff that you need from it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A slight side benefit. I mean, we probably don't need to talk this much about this card, but it's something I just realized is that this is a choose. So if they are playing illusions, you can break their illusions with this. A lot of flexibility with this card. I hadn't considered all these possibilities with it when I first looked at it, but I actually really like it. I think there's a lot you can do here. So I'd say Let's put it in.
Speaking of choose, I think this is going to be my last contribution to the Gambits here, but it's one of theirs, and I don't know how I missed it when we were talking about repositioning. It's Roaming Witness, and I would like to make a case for this replacing our Reborn in Darkness. So Reborn in Darkness being a reaction once the resurrection occurs. Roaming Witness not having that limitation, but still helping us reposition to where we need to be. Choose a friendly, Chain Rasp, remove the chosen fighter from the battlefield, and place the chosen fighter on an edge hex. Then give the chosen fighter 1 charge token. If that friendly fighter is adjacent to 1 or more enemy fighters, give each of the enemy fighters 1 condemned counter. So I like this a lot. It doesn't actually have any conditions on the token state of the Chain Rasp, so we could have already charged with them. We could have just brought them back. And when we drop that Fearsome Fortress token into play at the beginning of our game plan, we could put that, I believe, in an edge hex. I'm going to be really sad if I'm wrong, because I already stated this is a favorite deck of mine.
I think you're going to be sad.
I'm going to be sad. It's Fearsome Fortress can't go in an edge hex? Are you serious?
I don't think so.
All right,
let's double check that. I think you can.
I think it has to follow the same rules as token placement, but I've got the plot card right here.
I was literally digging into a
Let's
drawer.
see. Feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory, but not in starting, blocked, lethal, or cover. It can be in an edge hex.
Boom. There you go. So you can use Roaming Witness to help get you back into Conquered Domain right there.
Or just move a fighter up unexpectedly, I think is also a possibility.
For sure.
I
don't know about replacing Reborn in Darkness because I still like that utility, but I do think there's a conversation to be had about it.
I think there's room for both potentially. I don't hate it.
Because Roaming Witness was on my short list.
Oh, nice. Well, so the reason I was saying, a potential replacement for Reborn in Darkness is it's, for the most part, Reborn in Darkness is going to end up targeting that Fearsome Fortress token placement, right? So if Roaming Witness can do the same thing, then we've got 2 cards doing, accomplishing that. Maybe we like that redundancy. The other case with Reborn in Darkness, as we've already stated, is we could start flipping, right, on our way through the map. But are we going to be doing that too much? I'm not 100% certain.
Let's just put it in,
and
we.
Oh yeah, I got it in. Yeah, I like it.
So, I think where we're at right now, just looking at the list, we've got 14 gambits in. I think we have accuracy in the form of supports. We can kind of have some of our repositioning pieces also function as ways to give accuracy. I generally prefer plus dice, but I think given the way this warband tends to work, I think using supports is actually fine. They want to be supporting for some of their in-faction stuff anyway. So the question then just becomes, which ones of these end up being the cuts? I think one that feels like a possible cut for me, I'm not really sure about Commanding Stride. I think it doesn't synergize very well with holding in the middle, and I just don't know. I don't know. How often are we going to want to use a push away from the middle to get a free attack with the leader?
It can also keep the leader safe if the leader
is being threatened.
Is being threatened, fails an attack. I think it's got. So I will admit or concede it is outside of the end phase game plan, or we'll say even just the objective game plan holistically. So I could see it on the cutting block for sure, but I do think it's got a lot of tools for keeping your key fighter either where you need him from an attack standpoint or in safety, in a hurry.
Quick point of interest: this is not leader restricted.
I know.
I mean, that alone makes me itch
because you can't salvage it.
I'm less worried about that part, but I'm already on the fence about it just because it doesn't move us towards our game plan.
Yeah.
And I always hesitate about having cards that don't actively move me forward in my game plan.
I'm content with it being on the cutting block. And if you two want to move it from on the cutting block to cut, feel free.
You mean execute it?
Perfect.
Let's do it. Let's take it out. I think it's one of those cards. Davey mentions this fairly often in thinking about these kinds of newer deck builds where we don't have a ton of experience with the warband. You take it out thinking on paper it's probably not going to work, and then when you play your games, you think about all the situations where this would have been super helpful.
Man, I wish I had Inspired Command in my hand right now. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So you think about it like, man, should that have been in the deck because it could have saved my bacon in all of these situations? Or you're like, man, it really never came up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
thinking about it more, I know I suggested this one, but thinking about it more, I think countercharge maybe ends up being a little restrictive. I think one of the problems with it, although it's a push 3 and it can help you, if your opponent is playing with ranged fighters, there will be a lot of situations where you won't really be able to do the countercharges. Unless you want to like push the fighter who's being attacked way into enemy territory to then die a horrible death. So if your opponent isn't coming to you in no man's territory, suddenly countercharge feels a lot less useful, and in some cases you just won't be able to play it at all.
Sure.
So I think personally I'm feeling like maybe we just cut it, even though it's a push 3, and instead we keep around something like Mirror Move, which is just a reaction push to just have an available push all the time.
I like it.
Okay.
Yeah, something I found with countercharge, because it's a card I've played with quite a bit, is you'll have those rounds where you just finish your end phase and you're praying that you're going to win the roll off, and then you don't. But they've got a fighter paired against your fighter, just standing adjacent to each other.
Yeah, right.
Right. It comes up so
No
often.
charge.
It's like, oh, I hope I win the roll off, and then you don't. And it's like, oh, I'm really glad I drew into counter charge as one of my 5. I won't be able to use that to help me.
Yeah.
I
don't know. Anything else right now that you guys are feeling as an easy cut? I feel like we're starting to get to the hard cuts.
Yeah. Because we're at 12.
I mean, to have already cut down to 12 feels pretty good before we get to the upgrades.
I think so too.
Okay. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
Upgrades. So maybe boring, but I feel like an easy place to always start is Great Fortitude and Great Strength. They just can go right in.
So I actually left Great Strength out.
Really?
This time around.
Why are you the way that you are?
So okay, hear me out.
No.
So I just feel that with the kit the way it is, like, so I brought Glory Seeker instead.
I had both, but okay.
And I think an argument can be made for both. Like, I think generally you bring both, but when I was considering like what I would cut from this build, I was like, do I consider cutting Great Strength? And
what? Tell me real quick. Why would you bring a conditional +1 over a non-conditional +1?
Yes, thank you for asking me. You set me up for this. Perfect. Okay, so
I'm excited to hear this.
Wielder of the Blade is where you want your damage to be coming from, right? And that's already at 3 damage. So if you're adding +1 to it to actually cement a kill, your Glory Seeker is valid. We're already at 4, right?
Okay.
You always have the Scripter of the Sentence available to you, or sorry, not Scripter, the Sharpener, of course, the Sharpener. You always have the Sharpener available to you to add that +1 damage if you haven't drawn into Glory Seeker yet. Now, I think I'd rather, genuinely, I think I'd rather actually have Great Strength.
That also spends an action.
Exactly. I'd rather have Great Strength and spend a Glory than have to spend an action. So I think, I'd rather have both for consistency. But if I was hard-pressed, if I had to pick one in this warband, I think I'd bring Glory Seeker instead of Great Strength, because I can also give it to the Scripter, right? Great Strength can't help the Scripter, but he's a ranged fighter that can start dealing extra damage to, my 4 health or plus targets. And I just feel like everybody else is prepped already to take on somebody at 3 health or less. You've got 3 health or 3 damage coming in from your leader before Inspire. After Inspire, Bearer is there as well. And Scripter and Sharpener are only dealing 1 on their own normally, and their attack profiles are pretty abysmal, especially the Sharpeners. So I don't think you're planning to do work with Great Strength in the Sharpener to begin with. You're probably giving him a weapon. And then, are you really going to also invest Great Strength into him? Or also, your attackers are going to be primarily the wielder and the bearer, and I don't know if they need the help.
Sure.
And then the scripter can benefit from Glory Seeker as well. And if the aforementioned bearer and wielder do need the help, then oh my god, they're at 4 plus health the target, and Glory Seeker will do the trick.
Okay, I hear you on the scripter.
Okay,
I have one question for you.
sure.
Was Cackling Nightmare in your list?
Oh, yes, it was. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
If it wasn't, I was going to call you a damn fool.
Yeah. Yes.
Because having that utility on hip, so for those keeping score at home, Cackling Nightmare essentially lets you attack twice with the scripter. So having that extra damage from Glory Seeker and being able to just chunk down 4 health, potentially, on 2 successful attacks would be just primo.
Yeah, as a Skates Wild Hunt player, the archer in that warband also has essentially a Cackling Nightmare, and I can speak to its strength. It's good, especially with Glory Seeker.
To the point of Cackling Nightmare being more of a utility piece than something you would use for damage, Scripter will have the option to, after his attack, after an activation step. So, I mean, I guess you can't give 2 condemned counters. How would that work? Okay, so his reaction reads, after an activation step in which this fighter made this attack action, give the target 1 condemned counter. So if you've made the action twice, do you... Oh, no,
Yep.
You just won't get to do it. They're both after the activation step. Never mind.
Yep, you got there.
If you get the extra attack, you don't get to have condemned counters, which...
And I like to think of it as kind of like the adaptiveness to the game plan. It's like, you don't have Glory to put Cackling Nightmare out there at the beginning. That's fine. You're going to need the condemned counters, right? Well, as soon as you're a little further into the game, you got Glory rolling. Hopefully, you've got the condemned counters where you need them already. You can shift the game plan of the scripter with Cackling Nightmare.
Go turret mode.
Yep.
Don't hate it. So I'd say we can roll with that. Question.
Yes.
Do we take Enduring Executor as an additional Great Fortitude?
I just, on principle, will always take in factions over universals, just because. But
the question,
the universals get used more.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just the flavor, right?
Do you take both, though? Is the question.
It's a good question. It's one of those things that you test. I actually don't think that you take 2 out of the gate, and that just might be my playstyle experience. Is I just don't usually run a ton of plus health. But it would I'd bring Enduring Executor for that in faction Great Fortitude flavor, and then I put Great Fortitude in my I always have a little stack of cards that's like my continued considerations for the warband as I continue to play games.
Sure.
And Great Fortitude would end up in it, but I don't think it would end up in my first draft.
Okay. I would argue, though, that as another defensive upgrade, we do take Ethereal Immunity.
100%.
This makes rolls of double successes in this fighter's defense rolls. For your 2 dodge fighters, it makes them essentially 2 block.
I have one hesitation with that. I was all aboard that train when I was thinking an invade, but now we're going to spend a decent amount of time on feature tokens.
On objectives, though.
Right. So if you have Path to Victory in your hand, and you have Ethereal Immunity in your hand, you're going to be happy that you're going to be on cover while still, satisfying your Path to Victory condition.
True.
And it can, regardless of your current token placement, it can help benefit 2 of our surges. It can help with loyal allies. So you can score loyal allies off of just having that facing
yes,
in your roll. And
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm sold.
you literally don't even have to succeed. Like, you can still take damage from that, but you'll score loyal allies. Yeah.
Totally sold.
Awesome. And it also then helps with Contest of Equals.
You're still selling.
I already said take my money, damn it.
All right.
All right. So that one's in. I thought it was a really solid choice. I feel like one card that is very often taken in champs builds right now is Cursed Boarding Pike. I do kind of feel like both Scripter and Sharpener would benefit from this. And being that we're a hold the middle warband, having a range 2 attack action isn't actually a bad thing. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I think having a range poke is not bad, especially with hold middle.
And if we find room to continue to keep great strength in here, it's a range 2. It'll get the benefit from it. It's one of the best weapons in the game right now.
If we find room, would you?
I mean, I think it's maybe the best weapon they've ever printed. The fact that it gives spent glory when you're not on a feature token is almost inconsequential.
Yeah.
It's just an insanely good upgrade as a weapon upgrade. Okay.
I think the one that we haven't talked about yet directly, but have talked about in other conversations, is Chop Satisfaction.
Yes.
That is the if attack, give guard.
Oh yeah. Let's take that one because we're directly benefiting in our surges.
Yep.
And being on guard is just not a bad thing to have.
Especially when you can do it off of is it an attack or activation?
It's just attack activation.
In which the Spider-Man... Yeah, okay. Yep, an attack action. Yeah, it's just so good. Like, it, that scenario I painted where you're entering round 2, fingers crossed, like, you win, and, like, you don't have to charge. Like, I'm grabbing that guard token. Thank you very much.
Yup. Chilling Grasp. I think we should have a chat about this one.
Okay.
So this one is enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter cannot make move actions.
Okay. I'm going to hit the flavor text button here and say hold still, Josh.
Yep.
Keep that in mind. Another card that we alluded to already that helps with guard is Siege Master. So Siege Master is as a reaction after this fighter's activation. If this fighter is on a feature token within 1 hex of no one's territory, choose up to 2 friendly fighters on feature tokens. Give each chosen fighter 1 guard token. I don't know if this makes final cut, but I definitely think it makes consideration, as we've already discussed in length about the benefits of these particular fighters being able to get on guard. Our game plan currently is, that center hold counterpunch. So I think this one should at least be in the conversation. So
it's on the list.
Perfect. So moving back, what were you saying, Josh?
So Chilling Grasp, super, super interesting card in my opinion. So enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter cannot make move actions. Not being able to reposition a fighter until you chew through what's in front of them is rude.
So
it is restricted to chain rasps, but 2 of those are still chunky to get through.
So because it's restricted to chain rasps, I ended up cutting it from my list. I love this card, but like you kind of force their hand, right? So like it's one of those cards where I like it so much more in theory than I think I do in practice. I love the idea of like you're not moving, you're not charging, you are stuck right here. Like just the control play of it. But if you turn their game plan into, their only choice into, okay, I guess I have to attack you, and it's a chain rasp, it might not be the healthiest target to survive said attacking.
That said, we do have Great Fortitude and Enduring Executor on the table.
True. I guess.
But I think 2 upgrades to make 1 upgrade more effective And that's not their only role, but still.
Yeah.
So all right, here's another argument in my mind against this card. We're gonna be playing a lot of the time where we just want to sit in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
When will we have the opportunity to really hold them down in a spot where they don't want to be?
Right. So if they send a negotiator, to us, they probably already come to terms with them not leaving.
I really like this card in aggro, actually. I think there's an opportunity to send somebody in and then lock down some fighters and be like, cool, I got to make the charge I wanted to make anyway, and now your other fighters can't run away. But I think in this build, I think there's very few situations where they're really going to want to like not be in the middle taking out your fighters. So like holding them in the middle doesn't. Maybe there's an argument to say, well, in that case, you would actually send one of the chain rasps out to like stop them from coming to you.
Sort of a sacrificial lamb.
I don't know if it feels tough. It feels like it's a stretch play where like on paper it would be great if it worked out the way you want it to, and I think in practice it might end up not being super useful. I think this is another one where I would want to sort of keep it in mind when I play the games and see like, oh man, that could have been really useful. And I really wish I had that. And if it ends up coming up that way, maybe you slot it in after a game or two and then try it.
And I think if we had pushed this build aggro, to your point, I think it would have made my first draft for sure. Along with Mighty Swing, by the way, that's a gambit that we didn't.
Yeah. In aggro builds, I think this is like the deck for Mighty, or the warband for Mighty Swing, right? It'd be like speed 4 flying with a big juicy cleaver of a fighter. Like, let's just get in there. But yeah. Let's see. So how many slots we need? Just one more technically. I don't know how many more options you guys have thought of.
I've got 3 more, like
maybe
3 more that I'm like kind of on.
Right.
But want to see if they resonate with you guys at all. So I'll just power through these and let me know which one of them like jumps at you.
Yeah.
So first up, Lurking Crony. When a friendly fighter adjacent to this fighter makes an attack action, this fighter supports that fighter. Part of what pulled me in was not everybody's going to jump into a position where you're supported. This is going to be strong with the bearer of the block, not having to be immediately next to the target in order to give that cleave.
Yeah.
So repositioned supports was the highlight there. Next up, I've got Deaf to Mercy. Felt like a little bit of overkill because having ensnare on fighters that are already pretty accurate is just, you're already punching down on prime targets, it feels like. So I don't know how I feel about that one. And then Honed Instincts, which is innate support to range 1 attack actions.
What was the middle one? I'm sorry.
So the middle one was Ensnare. Deaf to Mercy.
So Deaf to Mercy. Okay.
So I will say, generally for upgrades, I don't like Cleave and Ensnare as the only thing that the upgrade gives. I feel like there's times where it's like, okay, I've got Ensnare, and then you're fighting a warband that's just block, and you're like,
you're fighting Stormcast, and it's like, well, glad I gave this upgrade slot.
Or the flip, and then you're just like, okay, great. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you're like, okay, cool, I get Ensnare, but they're rolling 3 dice anyway or something, and you're like, they're just rolling for crits, so they almost don't care. So I don't think they're usually super strong. They're not horrible, but like I think we can probably pick something up better. Honed Instincts is interesting. We don't
have a lot of time on Honed Instinct. I find that although it's awesome to have that guaranteed support, you then have to make sure that you're really pushing, like cementing that that option to make sure that you got somebody alongside to do the work. So since I've mentioned before, I don't really dabble in Death Warbands. I play a lot of Order, so I get Brigade Strength, and Brigade Strength just goes swimmingly with this card because Brigade Strength says if I'm throwing 3 dice, I have an additional support. I'm considered to have an additional support when I'm making the attack. So I don't know. With what we've been doing, from a game plan standpoint, I don't know if we're leaning enough into making sure we always have that support position or that additional support qualifier to make Honed Instincts work.
I think we have enough. We have Unexpected Ally. We have Hold Them Still.
Lethal Advance.
Yep. You can, theoretically, you could pick it up with Roamed Witness. It'd be tough, but you could make it happen. I think you got enough options for forcing supports. And then I have already forgotten the name of the card, but if we take that other one that you just mentioned, where a fighter...
Lurking Crony.
Yeah, you could have somebody like Scripter sitting on a feature token in no one's territory, and then Wielder or Bearer can swing around for an attack while standing adjacent to Scripter, and then have support from him without Scripter actually being adjacent to the target. I kind of like it. Getting an automatic success, especially with Wielder, feels gross.
Yeah. I guess I'm tripping a little bit. I'm not used to I'm also not used to playing much Resurrection. With Terminus, we're able to bring people right back next to it. I do think we have enough.
I'm intrigued.
Right. I'm okay to be wrong here.
Yeah, we could be very wrong in this choice, but I think I like it enough, and I think we're doing enough stuff where the accuracy boosts that we're using are based in support anyway. So if we're considering that, hey, the way we're adding accuracy is with supports, this is just doubling down on that. So
yeah, I think I just thought of all the times I had Honed Instincts equipped to a fighter and couldn't get somebody there. Right. And it's just
yeah, I hear you.
Mental blocking on it, but we're building towards it. We are.
I think until we see otherwise, I think we go with it. We say that's a part of our game plan. That's how we're adding our accuracy. I think it's probably okay.
I think
my favorite part of Lurking Crony is the flavor text.
Okay.
Which is a mocking laugh is all that is needed to distract a victim.
Yeah. Great. That's good.
So on the topic of accuracy, a card that I included in my considerations was Guided Blows. It is an in-faction upgrade. You can reroll 1 attack dice in the spider's attack rolls.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
No range restrictions.
Yeah, I think 99% of the time.
So now we've got 12 upgrades, 12 gambits, and 13 objectives. We pare down 1 objective, and we're fine.
12.
Sure.
Alex, this one's for you.
No, I do really like rerolls. Rerolls are solid. This also actually works well in our game plan of trying to find those supports for the support faces. It can also help our game plan of trying to have contests of equals. Maybe you don't necessarily know that you need to roll more successes, but never hurts, right?
Yeah.
Never hurts to roll a crit.
Yeah.
Unless you're playing new players, then it hurts a little.
Might kill a friendship. But it never hurts your game.
So I'm pretty much tapped out of stuff that I would want to include. I toyed around with the idea of stuff like Duelist Speed or Quickening Greaves, but I think we've got enough push tech in Gambits. We don't need it in our upgrades.
I agree. I actually had a card I'm really hot on right now is Temporally Aligned, which is an upgrade. React after a charge, you may push your fighter 1, right? So I've been really hot on being able to use that to get into whatever position I need that to be, whether, charge just beyond a feature and then, step back onto it, or, hit somebody on a feature and then immediately follow up into that position. But as you said, we have plenty of gambits right now supporting push that we don't necessarily need to take away from what our upgrades can offer us to add more of that in.
Anything else for you, Josh, that feels like we need to consider?
Not that I can think of. I'm racking my brain for anything that I missed. I had, before we had, shifted over to the Fearsome Fortress, I had Beast Caller just to try and have more baked in push and support tech. So I like the direction this has gone.
Sure.
I also added Walking Wall. It's a card I love, just being in the consideration column. Here, what it could benefit is Conquer Domain. It could somehow, it's an upgrade that really doesn't do anything outside of, work with your Fearsome Fortress game plan.
I don't know that we're doing enough to take Walking Wall.
I don't think so either.
I like the card in some situations, but right now I don't think we're leaning enough into Fearsome Fortress to want it. So
I would agree.
I say we don't include it.
Yeah, I'm still happy we talked about it because it's a really interesting Fearsome Fortress card.
Yep.
But yeah, I agree. It doesn't fit quite here. Getting you potentially one off of Conquer Domain isn't enough, and that's really all it could do.
All right.
If there's no others, I say we kind of work from left to right here and narrow down which objective we want to get rid of and go from there.
So I am still between cutting one of Bound in Servitude or Off with Their Head. So the more that we've built towards having supports, the more I'm feeling like we keep Bound in Servitude. But I agree. I could be persuaded that we keep Off with Their Head.
As much as I like Off with Their Head, right now our total glory before this cut is at 19. So if we drop this, we're at 18. And 18 is kind of the average that I like to sit at. And we actually already have the flex with Conquer Domain to make that
even higher.
Yeah. Right? So actually, Off with Their Head is my choice for cut.
Okay.
I would agree, because if we're doing a come to us counterpunch, we can't expect the leader to always be there.
Yeah. And we can still pick up Bound in Servitude with the leader. It's just not required.
Right.
Okay. So that locks us in. I'll run down the objectives that we now have. We have Contest of Equals, solid staple. Earthworks, yep. Loyal Allies, which, as we've discussed a lot lately, we're trying to lean into the support plan. Bound in Servitude, kept for that same reason. Gather a Crowd, we're anticipating being around at least some enemy fighters, so I think that's doable. And then Quick to Judge, we need to condemn people, and we are definitely hopefully going to do that. And I think, as we mentioned when we first included, if for whatever reason you can't score that, you're probably doing well. We have Path to Victory. For our Hold 2 strategy, we have Path of Death, where we just want to kill people, and it gives them that hard choice of how to deny this. Teleports make things difficult, but I think that's a risk we're willing to take. Conquer Domain is an easy include. Superiority Confirmed. This is maybe a bit of an odd choice just because maybe the leader doesn't survive, but we could just have him step one hex across the line, and I think we can pretty reliably pick this up. Having 4 wounds of enemy fighters out is not hard. All Rise. Kill people and raise fighters doesn't feel like it's not going to happen. I think that's just part of your game plan. And then Tools of Death, we just have to have upgrades that we've placed across the warband, and I think we can manage that. So, Gambits, where do we cut here? normally I wouldn't say this, but I feel like maybe we've stacked up too many pushes. The place we start is we find a push to cut because we have a lot.
I actually think Roaming Witness is on the chopping block, and here's why. We are allowed to put that what is it? That feature token on a edge hex, but that's not always. I don't think there are many times where we want a fighter in an edge hex, especially if we're kind of holding in the middle. It just seems more niche than what we're going for.
I can see that.
If that makes sense. Because in addition to that, if we're putting somebody on an edge hex with a charge token, they aren't going to be doing much as far as supporting.
Potentially. There's the play where you use this to set up the next turn's attack if your opponent already has a fighter near an edge hex. But, I mean, again, we're talking about niche cases here. I wouldn't see that as a bad cut. Skyler, you kind of fought for this one. Do you have any audience to say we need to keep it?
I'm trying to think of why I would keep Reborn in Darkness over it. And I see Josh's point that Reborn in Darkness doesn't cost us a charge token, correct?
It doesn't cost us a charge token, and it doesn't cost us having to place that freebie in the edge.
I just feel like Roaming Witness is more flexible. Like I do gather that Reborn in Darkness.
Now that being said, I was also going to say that Reborn in Darkness is probably also up there. Like, if it's not our 11th card to cut, it's like barely holding on to that 10th slot.
I actually really don't hate Reborn in Darkness with the I guess with the hold game plan, because we can always prep a cover, or we can always prep an objective into cover for use for this, to help us secure Conquer Domain, Path to Victory, or even just get us up the field. So I don't hate Reborn in Darkness. You're kind of winning me over on it. Roaming Witness, I really like that it can also be used for some really cheeky charged out play. So like you might think that, you're maybe next to my leader, but you're like, oh, you still got one to charge. Nah. And it's like, yeah, but it's a chain rasp, and I'm actually just going to edge hex him right now, so that I can just smack you again with my leader. And
I don't hate that. Yeah. But do you still think it's stronger than the other 11?
Than the other 11. I think
than any of the other 11, I should say.
Well, so how many push do we have in here?
So we have 1, 2, a reposition in Condemned Step Forward, and a extra move with Hold Them Still.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we actually don't have
so we have 2 push, at this point. 2 push, 2 reposition.
Right, because we already cut Commanding, Stride, and Countercharge. So
correct.
Do I think it's stronger than the rest? Just looking at our options here. What are you guys thinking? I mean, what else is currently up for maybes for cuts?
So
personally,
I was thinking Roaming Witness and was hesitating on Reborn in Darkness, but you kind of talked me back into it.
Okay.
So
I'm willing to cut Roaming Witness to keep Reborn because I just think it works better with our current game plan.
Okay.
I like both, but sometimes it's the hard choices at this point.
All right. Now we've got the house cat.
So I guess I thought about it. So a lot of these reposition things kind of work like a push almost, right? So that's sort of where I was actually coming from, in that we have a lot of things for moving / pushing fighters, which is where I was kind of like, we could probably cut one. I do wonder if we need both Inspired Command and Lethal Advance.
Okay, cool. I'm glad somebody else said it. I was thinking the same thing. I'd cut lethal advance.
Yeah, I would kind of cut lethal advance as well. I do like that it's a double push, but it's a double push towards an enemy fighter, which means it maybe doesn't get you onto the token that you want.
Yeah, that's fair.
And
I was forgetting about the closest, so I think that's the cut.
And they're both leader restricted, so that's a little risky.
Coming into cuts, lethal advance was my number one cut, but I wanted to hear somebody else say it first. So
that's where my eyes were hovering over scapegoat, but that's still my that's my damage, not the right choice.
I really like scapegoat. I think I'd be pretty hard pressed to get rid of that. I think it's a solid. It's both an accuracy piece and a utility piece. I like it. I say we get rid of lethal advance. I think we have. So I kind of like having like 5 movement pieces in your gambits, and then a couple accuracy boosts and a couple others.
I think with a build like this, for sure.
I actually like that, where we kind of end up pretty well. I'll just quick run this down. We got Inspired Command, which lets you push one or give a guard token if your leader is alive. You have Mirror Move, so we can react to push. This can be crazy good. It can also end up being a frustrating card. There's times where you can't use it, but it's still solid. Partial Resurrection, get the fighter back. Reborn in Darkness, we're leaning into the resurrection stuff, so we have it. Death Soldiers, just really good card. Unexpected Ally gives support. Important, as Skyler mentioned, it lasts until you get the successful attack. Condemn Step Forward, it's confusion plus a condemn counter. Pretty solid when you're wanting to hold stuff. Hold them still, you get that extra move, and just an extra move. Okay. Scapegoat, we get to do a whole bunch of stuff with this one. We talked a lot about it. And then you must serve to get our other resurrection card in the Gambit slot. I like where that lands. That gives us, I think, a set of cards that play very well into what we're trying to do in the objectives. I think it gives us a lot of utility pieces and some accuracy. The accuracy is not in plus dice like you would normally run, but I think it still works. So we now have upgrades. So where I would start, so we had Skyler's point of maybe we don't need both Glory Seeker and Great Strength. So we could lean into taking out Great Strength. I think that was already a maybe. And then theoretically, we don't need 2 Great Fortitudes.
Yeah, so that's actually one of those. Where I would start is let's cut the non-flavor one.
Would actually disagree.
Oh.
So I think with the resurrection tech that we have, being able to have 2 extra wounds into the mix to make an extra beefy fighter that either just got resurrected and is back in play, or just making it that much more to chew through in order to have fighters off the board is going to be that much stronger with what we've built.
I'm going to pitch back the question you asked me then. Is that stronger than all the other 11 objectives or upgrades?
So I would say it is I think it is for sure better than just Great Strength. I would say having those 2 available is better than Great Strength for sure.
Interesting.
So I was going to make a argument that we didn't add draw tech, and that's okay. But when you don't add draw tech, you want consistency in options. So I actually think that kind of leans towards keeping both Glory Seeker and Great Strength for your plus damage options. Just because you might not see the one, if we limit it to 1, it could end up in your bottom 5 and you might not see it. But you have a greater chance of getting one of the 2, right? Given again that we're not going to be using draw tech to dig deeper into our 20 cards.
I see. So we have Job Satisfaction as a way to get guard tokens, and we have Siege Master as a way to get guard tokens.
And Inspired Command. I'm willing to cut.
Do we need all of those?
I'm willing to cut.
So I think
Siege Master. I think
I actually disagree.
I would say job satisfaction.
I was going to say the same thing because it doesn't require Siege Master doesn't require an attack action, and it's on multiple fighters.
Yeah.
Job satisfaction is just the one fighter, and only if they make an attack. I personally, that's the one I'm seeing where I'm like, this is redundancy that we probably don't need.
Agree. Actually,
I would agree.
Yeah.
So job satisfaction sounds like we're in agreement. Is the 12th cut?
That is one cut, and then we need one more.
Oh man, that was such a hard cut. I like that card so much, just from a flavor standpoint.
It's a fun card.
Same.
I think it's probably not actually as strong as it feels. I think it's better in an aggro build, actually.
I think so too.
Because then when you charge forward into, the mix, you can guard yourself up.
So I think Cackling Nightmare is beyond touching at this point because we have so many. Because we have things that want dice results.
I also think there's just a lot of utility in having Cackling Nightmare right now.
Yeah, I genuinely think that one's beyond touching.
Yeah, because we can resurrect that fighter.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's just, there's ways to use it to drive fighters back. You can add extra damage. Like, it's just good right now. I think.
Range 3 pew pews
with us playing good. Hold the middle game, Cackling Nightmare ends up being much better than I think. Mm-hmm. I'm still at either we cut one of the extra wounds or one of the extra damages. Personally, technically Cursed Boarding Pike is kind of an extra damage. Now, Cursed Boarding Pike certainly benefits from great strength, but it can benefit from Glory Seeker as well.
I think Cursed Boarding Pike stays in over Great Strength or Glory Seeker simply because it's got more dice. And again, we have things that want more dice digging for dice results.
I think we cut Great Strength.
Oh, snap.
I think we cut it.
I would have cut Fortitude here personally, but
I think you could go either way. My personal thinking though is just that you're going to be putting fighters into danger because you have to be in the middle. And I just like having a few extra wounds for that.
I also like the power of resurrection on it.
It is decent with resurrection. I think there's arguments to be made that, at least with your power card resurrections, you're going to vulnerable no matter what. So
I'm going back against my initial take. It's not enough that we have fighters that exist. We have to have fighters that can make other things not exist. We have Path to Victory, which requires a kill. We have Path of Death, which requires 2 kills. We have Superiority Confirmed, which requires at least 1 kill. I think, especially if we're going up against a Mollog or chunky fighter warbands, having that extra damage is going to help more than just existing.
Okay.
There it is.
I'm fine with either cut. I personally was leaning only because Bearer of the Block inspires to have extra damage. I was like, yeah, he's probably going to work to give us that extra damage. But
that in itself requires kills.
It does. Yeah. I'm fine with having more damage. I don't think you can really ever have too much. There's very few warbands where you can have too much damage. I think it ends up being a situation where we see what happens in games, and it's kind of like, oh man, if I had just had one more wound, this could have made a difference.
Right.
Like I said, I'm fine with cutting either one. I think there's redundancy there, and we don't need it. So, yeah, we can cut Great Fortitude.
Let's pull Great Fort and call it a night.
I really like those cuts. I think keeping Siege Master over Job Satisfaction is the right call there, especially since we didn't go aggro build.
Yep.
Solid deck, guys. I like it in theory.
Took us a while to get there. But as I mentioned at the top of this, these tend to go long. So there is our deck. We built it out. We will link it in the show notes. But I think that'll do it. Coming up next, we will be doing a bat rep with this warband into something. To be determined, but I think this should be fun. This is probably not what Brian would have voted for this warband, I would guess, but That's what happens when you're not here.
Ghosts show up.
Yeah, so that's something you can look forward to. As always, if you want to let us know why all the choices we made were totally horrible, or if you want to let us know how you love this idea, you can reach us at WTHcast on Twitter or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like to check out any of the other content that we have, or if you are listening to this and it's been out for a while and you're trying to find the follow-up episodes, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com and find all the other content for all of the shows in the Mortal Realms network. Thanks as always to everybody in that network for all the great work they do. And thanks to GW for getting us preview copies. We've had this warband for what feels like an age now, even though they've not been out that terribly long, because we got to do some preview work for these guys. I do have a card for the Flavitext quiz if you guys are ready to go for that.
Let's do it.
I'm excited.
All right. So this is one that did not make it into the deck. I will give you that clue, and it is an objective, so narrows it down a little bit. To cross Nagash by intent or failure is to tempt eternal, twisted damnation.
If it's not a kill surge, I don't know what it is.
It is not a kill surge.
It is not a kill surge? Well, then I don't know what it is.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Oof.
Would you run that by me one more time?
To cross Nagash by intent or failure is to tempt eternal, twisted damnation.
Is that the Triumph of Death?
It is not.
Oh.
It is judge, lest ye be judged.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes. All right. And then for recommended listening, since we don't have Davey to do the amazing work that he always does in finding absolutely perfect songs for these things, I'm going to go with one that I've always thought fit death warbands for whatever reason, and it could just be me and my own headcanon, but is Hail to the King by Avenged Sevenfold.
Oh my God, yes.
Josh proves. And that will do it for us tonight. I've been Phil.
And I've been Skyler.
And I've been Josh.
Yeah, so
go. You go ahead. You jump in first.
You go first.
No, you. Okay, I'll go. So, I'll be honest. I spaced out a little bit.
Oh, okay. Sorry, this is a long one, Davey.
Thanks, Davey. We love you. So here's pushes are actually kind of, and let me back up a little bit. Davey, thanks for cutting out my word vomit there.
Hello, bloopers.
Yep.